Hello, and welcome to another episode of Let's Argue About Plants, the podcast for people who love plants.
Just not always the same ones.
I'm Steve Aiken from Fine Gardening Magazine.
And I'm Danielle Sherry from Fine Gardening Magazine. And today, in the midst of a July heat wave, we are talking about favorite workhorse plants. It's 90 degrees. I think we should talk about workhorses because I'm looking at my garden going, I can't believe everything is still somewhat alive right now. And particularly my workhorses, I am truly appreciating the fact that we've had no rain and they're still looking okay. Are you a workhorse in July, Steve?
I'm not a workhorse at any time, and I'm much less likely to be a workhorse when it's hot and humid out. It's my least favorite type of weather. It's miserable. I don't want to be any part of it, and I kind of just shut myself away and wait for the temperature to pass.
Right. I kind of feel the same way. I like the heat, but I don't love humid. I don't love drought for my garden. It just felt like a good topic to have here in July and to talk about like plants that might not be the shiniest, most woohoo plants, but those plants that you can really depend on that just carry themselves through the year and really just, I don't know, they're the workhorses. They're the worker bees of the garden. What was your definition that you considered?
I thought about plants that I can just shove in pretty much anywhere, and not just from a cultural standpoint of like, can they take the sun or the soil there, but will they play nicely with others? Will they have some sort of, presence? They should look good at least some part of the year, but then, have something going on the rest of the year. But when I'm thinking about an area like, I'll plant a this and a that, and I'll just shove a whole bunch of this in there. Like that to me is a workhorse plant. That last plant, like, I'll just fill in with this. But the hardest part about these plants is finding them, really. So, I have a bunch of specific cultivars, and really any cultivar of these plants would work just fine. Like I can't find the specific one. Just another one would, as long as the size and the color is the same, it should do just fine. But it's just like, cause you need, 7, 8, 9 of them sometimes. And you can go to the nursery, and if they have it, they have 3, So,
Did you go into trees and shrubs, or did you stick strictly with perennials?
I did strictly perennials. I don't know if there's a workhorse tree, something that I would put in everywhere. Unless I lived in a forest, that kind of thing.
Yeah, or a cool like dwarf columnar tree. I'm just throwing it out there because I did not have any trees either. I do have. I know you're shocked. A couple of shrubs on my list too.
Yeah, no, that's cool. You can, like workhorse shrubs are probably even more useful than workhorse perennials. My mind tends to go to perennials first for some reason.
So lay your first one on me. I'm going to act very surprised because I don't know what's coming.
Well, the first plant I thought of really was this plant that I keep thinking like, I'm just going to put a whole bunch more of those in over here. And, what should I do over here? I'll plant a whole bunch more of these. And it's a nepeta. It's a catmint. And again, any catmint, is a workhorse plant for me. But the one that I'm really, digging right now, or that I really think is a really good workhorse is Cat's Pajamas, catmint. They all have to have cat names for some reason. Like it already has, I don't know. But Cat's Pajamas, hardy zones 3 to 8, only gets to be, it get maybe just above a foot tall, and not quite twice as wide, maybe about 20 inches wide, I think is what I was reading. Full sun to partial shade. And it gets the deep blue catmint flowers late spring into early summer. The grayish foliage, but it stays short and compact. Like it has a good bulky spread to it, but it stays short enough that it's not going to be like one of the massive ones like Walker's Low or Six Hills Giant, which are great for other reasons. But to me, like Cat's Pajamas, I can jam that sucker in pretty much anywhere. And it seems to be doing fine no matter where I throw it. And to me, that's what you want in a workhorse plant. I was trying to think of what makes cat's pajamas different from any other shorter catmint, and I can't really find out what it is. Supposedly, it blooms 2 to 3 weeks earlier than other varieties, but I didn't really notice that. I wasn't looking for it. It doesn't bloom earlier than Little Titch, but Little Titch is really short and really
so tiny.
Spread out. This one is more like a dwarf version of the more classic versions, and so maybe it blooms earlier than like Junior Walker or Persian Blue or some of those other ones that aren't as small. But this is the one that I grow, and I don't grow those other ones. So I grow this. I have Walker's Low. I have Six Hills Giant. I have Little Titch. And this is the one like, oh, I wish I had more of those cat's pajamas. I tossed those in there. And I've actually been back to the nursery to buy up what they had, and chuck those into some different areas because they seem really tough and they'll look good with anything. So that's why I like it.
I think, Nepida's workhorse plants, 110%. And I feel like I missed the mark because I have Little Titch, which for me is too little. It's the flowers are too little. It's a great behaved plant. Great plant. But for, when I planted it, I was expecting more of a, flowy and billowy catmint. It's not really like that. It's tight. It's almost like a germander instead. Like to me, that's what it feels like. And then I have Joann Reed, or is it Joanna Reed, which is a beefier one. And the thing that bothers me with those is that they do the splay. They get bigger, just like Walker's Low does. They get bigger, they bloom, and then they kind of splay out. I mean, it honestly looks like a big fat cat sat on the plant, which very well could have happened, but I doubt that it happens every single year consistently. So I like that you're saying cat's pajama is that in between, you still get that, boom, impact, but it's not going to be a flopsy mopsy.
Yeah, and I was trying to think like, well, if it does splay, it's small enough that it's not going to look like, oh my God, like some garden gnome version of Moses just walked through and tried to part the catmint, like it's not going to look like that. It might just look a little gangly. And the thing about all those catmints, when they splay open, new growth comes up from the beginning. So when they splay open, you cut off all this spready stuff. If you want to, I don't even bother to do that. And I haven't. I know that catmints do that, but I haven't had a ton of trouble with that. And it might be because I'm a little more forgiving, or just kind of oblivious to the whole thing.
Well, and interesting enough, one of the ones that you mentioned as your also ran for catmints, I believe our expert coming up in expert testimony hops on the catmint bandwagon. So. You're in good company there.
It seems to be a thread throughout, 80 whatever episodes, that the expert testimony always tends to support what I'm saying. That's just an observation. I don't mean anything
until
into
it
that,
doesn't. Until it doesn't.
Oh, and when that should happen, I guess we'll let people know. But until that time. Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, the expert, I didn't ask her about this, but the expert would agree with this pick of mine. And I think you will too, because you've heard me talk about it before. We've agreed that we like this plant. And that's Biocovo geranium, which is Geranium cantabrigiensis Biocovo. Yours is Carmina, right? Your geranium of choice is Carmina.
Yeah, that would be the one that I can't mention on the show because you are mentioning yours. So yeah.
So this is a perennial geranium. It's got these adorable leaves that are somewhat fan-shaped, teeny tiny little fan-shaped leaves. This time of year, it is blooming. A month ago, it was blooming. A month from now, it will be blooming. It's a prolific blooming perennial. It only gets to be 12 to 14 inches tall and then kind of masses out. I don't ultimately know. I heard that it gets 2 feet wide. Mine is at least 3 feet at this point, and I keep cleaving off pieces of it like you do with your Carmina. Biacova loves to be divided. It's, is it rhizomatic? So it kind of has these little plantlets that kind of splay themselves off of the main mother plant. And I just rip pieces off of it and kind of poke it here, there, and everywhere. Partial shade, full sun. I've got one that is borderline full shade, doesn't bloom as much, but the plant still looks great. It's also a perennial that gets fall color, beautiful fall color, like a burgundy yellowish color to the leaves. So that's a nice little extra bonus as well for a perennial to really kind of go that long. So the flowers of Biacova are supposedly white, but the inside anthers or stamens are pink. So it gives this appearance that the flowers, which I'm going to steal your phrase, they look like a flower that a little kid would draw with like the 4 little petals. They look light pink, not white. I have mine backed up by a Sarah Bernhardt peony, and it's the perfect color combination. It picks up, each of them kind of pick up on the pinks and the whites in each other's blossoms. But just a really great plant. Supposedly it wants moist, well-drained soil. I have lean, dry soil in almost all of my garden, and it does just fine with that. And zones 5 to 8, so a pretty decent zonal range on it as well. So I really like Biacova. I chose it over Carmina because you haven't given me any Carmina yet. So that's why I went with that one.
Yeah, I was going to divide it in spring, but I didn't get around to it. And I said, well, I might as well just wait till fall then with that, because it has spread so much, it's overtaking my walkways.
Oh, wow.
But Biacova is great. Carmina is great. Cantabrigiense as a species is great.
Mm-hmm.
But you can the plant I was actually going to do was big root Geranium macrorhizome, which I'm just starting to plant everywhere. Like, I need more of that, and just chucking that in everywhere. Full sun to almost full shade to almost full sun. Nice spreading ground cover, and there's a lot of geraniums that do that. Geranium sanguineum, Geranium macrorhizome, Geranium cantabrigiense, are all these like low growing, clumpers. There are some geraniums that are kind of scraggly.
Hi, Roseanne.
They kind of like climb and weave their way in. So not all geraniums have that nice dense habit. So, but all the ones that we're mentioning are total workhorses. And you kind of can't have too many of them. No. Because you always have like this little gap, like, oh no, I don't want to look at that plant's bare legs. What can I toss there? Boom, one of these low growing geraniums does the trick. Always,
And I wish actually that I had never, you hear Roseanne geranium is probably the best known, arguably the best known perennial geranium, and I'm really kind of bummed about that, because to me, that's not a plant that's easy to work with. It's not very well behaved. It is kind of scraggly. It needs something to kind of scamper through. Over time, mine actually, it bloomed so much that I think it bloomed itself out. It got smaller and smaller and smaller until it only exists as this teeny tiny little plant now. I don't think Roseanne's that great. I'm not a fan. And I really wish that some of these other geraniums would get a little bit more love, or at least more love than Roseanne, because I think they're far superior plants.
Yeah. Roseanne is a good bloomer. She was popular. But then what you have done, and what a lot of people are doing, is they're just circling back to the classic varieties, which are the ones that we keep mentioning. They don't have the bloom power, they don't have the flash of being the newest and latest, but they're better, and they're still around for a reason. Now they've come up with versions of Roseanne that are more compact, and I forget the names of them, but they are working on that sort of loose, open habit of Roseanne. But in the meantime, go with Geranium cantabrigiense, go with Geranium macrorhizome, go with the other one, Sanguinium, that I mentioned. There are just a ton of great species of geraniums, and their cultivars are all wonderful too. Has Richard Hawkey ever done? He did something on geraniums, didn't
Yeah, he did.
he?
He
Yeah.
did perennial geraniums. Gosh, probably way back in like Fine Gardening issue 120 something. And yes, some of these did make it on there. I think Roseanne did as well. Oh, actually, no, I think he dissed Roseanne in favor of Brookside Blue or something along those lines. So yeah. So that would be worth looking up, dear listeners. Get onto the Fine Gardening website and look up Richard Hawkey's plant trial results for perennial geraniums.
All right. So my next plant is one that I'm new to. I'm only in my second year with it, but I'm already wondering where else can I put this? Because man, it's just doing great, and it feels like the type of plant. I know it's the type of plant that can go anywhere because it's a solidago, it's a goldenrod, and they just pop up naturally all around my yard, and I love them, and they're great, and they require nothing from me. But this is a different species of goldenrod. The specific cultivar is called Solar Cascade. And the species is Solidago shortii, hardy from zones 5 to 9. Well,
Sorry,
I
like that.
Well, it's
shortii.
The man's name was Short, who discovered this. But Solidago shortii is actually on the federal endangered list, and so it grows. There's like a river that separates Kentucky and Indiana, and it grows like in like one spot. On either side of the river. Like, so one's in southern Indiana and the other one's in like, north, eastern Kentucky or wherever. And that's all they grow. And so it's federally endangered. And so I guess the Cincinnati Zoo, in an effort to, make sure that this thing doesn't disappear, made a selection of it and propagate it. And they're starting to get it into the trade. I didn't know any of this when I bought the plant. I honestly don't even remember buying the plant. Like, it's like, like I'm putting in stuff and I'm like, what is that? Solar Cascade. Like, did I buy that? All right. Well, it's here. And so the thing that makes me like it, like right off the bat, is normally I find goldenrod foliage to be very coarse. It's got like those hairy, fuzzy stems, the big leaves are kind of fuzzy. This doesn't seem to have that. The foliage is still, like lance shaped, short little guys, but it's not fuzzy. It's like a glossy, deep green. It's a really handsome plant, when it's not in bloom, which is most of the year because it doesn't bloom until late summer, early fall. So this is a full sun to partial shade plant. I have it in partial shade. It's planted right next to a ligularia. It prefers moist soil, but can take regular soil. So don't worry if you're not on the edge of a stream. You can still grow it. I don't give it any extra moisture than anything else, and it's doing great for me. It's going to get just above 2 feet tall, maybe like 2.5 feet tall, and about 2 feet wide. So some goldenrods have a tendency to like run and spread, and this is more of a clumper. It's going to beef up, but it's not going to take over your garden. So really about a nice 2 foot wide clump, I guess we should expect it to get. Like I said, the flowers appear late summer, early fall, as with goldenrods, and the stems kind of arch over, I guess, with the weight of the flowers. So you get like these, like a golden cascade, effect from it, and it's really stunning, and pollinators love it. Bumblebees, butterflies. There's always somebody buzzing around that thing when it's in bloom, which makes me happy. It makes me feel like I'm doing something right. But I will say it's a fine line between cascading and flopping. And I'm worried that as it gets a little bit older, it might cross the line into being a flopper, being something that I might have to stake, or wrap like some twine around or something to hold it up or something.
How tall has yours gotten at this point? Is it maxing out at its 2.5 feet, or is it staying?
Yeah. It's definitely at least 2 feet, and it might grow a little taller. But because it's such the foliage is so handsome, and it's a strong upright form, until it starts to bloom, it really has a nice presence in the garden. And so the foliage is like a dark green. It's kind of moody. It's got a personality to it, and it seems to be rather flexible in terms of where it goes. just not too much shade and not too dry, and it should be, it should be fine. So I'm just trying to jam that thing in anywhere I can, because it's really cool, and because I tend to forget about late summer flowers. I tend to do most of my planting early in the season or buying early in the season. And so by the time late summer comes around, like whatever happens. So if I can actually plan in advance, for something to be happening in August, without any work from me, that's great. And so it's Solar Cascade Solidago, zones 5 to 9, Solidago shortii.
It sounds like the better version of Fireworks Solidago, which has been very popular in recent years. It's got that cascading or yellowy flowers, but it sounds like the better version because the foliage on shortii is a deeper green, it's glossier, it's less weedy, it sounds looking.
Yeah.
And that's my thing with Solidagos is they can look weedy. They really do until they burst into bloom, which then you appreciate them. But, looking weedy for the first 6 months is kind of tough.
Yeah. I mean, that's and I don't know that this thing's personality is going to change, as it gets older, because I've seen some pictures of it and I'm like, well, that doesn't look like the plant that I'm growing. But right now it's this handsome plant that I keep forgetting that it's a Solidago. The first few times I'm like, what is that? Oh, that's right. That's a Solidago. Because it's a good looking plant, supposedly shorter than Fireworks. And I haven't spent a lot of time with Fireworks outside of it being in bloom. So I can't really talk about the foliage of that because I'm just so transfixed with the blooms, which always look great in late season. Yeah.
You know what? Fireworks foliage looks like most Solidago foliage, as almost like many native aster foliage. It's one of those things that you accidentally weed out in the early spring because you go, this is a weed, but it's actually not. It's a Solidago. So I would hop on the bandwagon for a Solidago that's got more attractive foliage.
My trick to that is to make sure you're growing it in a clump, so it looks deliberate, so it doesn't look like weeds that have popped up here and there. So if you have like a decent clump of it, and then you see a couple, it looks like it's just spread out a little bit. Whereas if it's too random, then it really looks like a weed, but if there's a clump with some stragglers around, to me, it looks a little bit more like, oh, that's an intentional plant, because I have a lot of plants. But the good things about my garden is that I have a lot of plants that have done that could look like weeds if you didn't know what you're looking at. And the better part about that is I have weeds that people think are ornamental plants, so people just can't tell the difference. So
right. Yeah. I meant to do that. Well, speaking of spreading out, I'm going to choose my next plant is a shrub that has quite an impressive wingspan. It is a juniper, and I've taken and caught flack for years for recommending a juniper. And I love this juniper. I've loved it since my days of working in garden centers. It's Dobbs frosted juniper. It's zones 4 to 9. And I mean, when you're talking about a plant that's literally bomb-proof, junipers, I mean, they're deer-proof. They don't get a whole lot of diseases. They take lean soil. They take hot baking sun. They don't really require a lot of pruning on your part. And Dobbs frosted just takes it to the next level. Junipers get a bad rap because everybody knows blue rug juniper. That's, I think, growing in every big box store parking lot in the continental United States and into Canada. But not all junipers are like that. And Dobbs frosted juniper looks like it went into the hair salon in the 1980s and it got one of those like frosted haircuts or hairdos where, the tips are blonde and they go to a little bit of white. So you've got this green shrub that just had the Farrah Fawcett effect done to it. It's just awesome.
Sorry, are you listing this as a positive quality?
It is. It's so positive. I mean, I think on a woman's hairstyle nowadays, it's not a positive, but on a plant, it's a positive. It definitely has the frosted hairstyle look.
women got frosted hairstyle too?
Yes.
Because all I can think of is Vanilla Ice and like one of the members of the Saved by the Bell cast, and like and like that whole era of.
Oh no! Frosting was a thing. Was a definite thing. It was a very specific type of highlighting for women's hairstyles in the 80s.
Well, so what we try to do on this podcast, dear listeners, is when we talk about things. We try to put up pictures of them so that you can have a better sense of what we're talking about. So Danielle's going to post a picture of herself with her frosted tips. That'll be on our website, finegardening.com. Just look for episode, whatever.
I'll do one of those. I'll do one of those. How it started, how it's going, and how it started is me with frosted hair in the 80s, and how it's going is the Dobbs frosted currently in my garden. So anywho, Dobbs frosted. So it's 2 feet tall. It gets 5 to 6 feet wide. And actually the photo I'm going to post on finegardening.com of it is my shrub growing as a front of the border plant right along a stone wall. And it's so beautiful. It was one of the first shrubs that I put in 10 years ago. And this thing has been through it all. It has been through snow, compacting it down and breaking off some branches. It's been through voles recently, actually attacking the root system where I could almost lift the entire mature shrub out of the ground, planted it back in there, tried to keep the voles away from it. And it took a licking and keeps on ticking. This is just a great, solid plant. And it is, because it's got that color change going on all the tips, is super, super attractive. It almost looks Calamintha-like, not in the form of the needles and the look of it, but it's just got that interesting coloration that you a lot of times would associate more with a cryptomeria or a Calamintha, but it's a juniper. And the great thing about it is junipers are cheap. You go into a garden center and for a cryptomeria or a Calamintha, you're paying top dollar. But for a Dobbs frosted that looks very, very similar, you're paying a lot less money. And it's just a super, super workhorse. I think I already mentioned it, but zones 4 to 9 too. So this is a tough shrub. I already said it's deer proof. It's bomb proof. It is a really, really amazing shrub that deserves more love. And I think it doesn't get it because it's a juniper.
Right. Well, so you say junipers, and I think ouch.
Yes.
Because they reach out and bite you, and they leave you with that weird little rash. And like you can't even walk next to them. Like you can't brush your ankles by them because they'll reach out and stab you. And then
but that makes them deer proof.
Great. I don't want to get stabbed. They also collect and hoard leaves. So like if you've ever tried, like all the fall leaves come and they work their way down below and amongst the branches, and then you must deal with the juniper and its tendency to bite as you lift up the branches and try to get the damn leaves out from underneath them. And it just always looks like heck. And it's just that's my problem with juniper, not Dobbs frosted, which is an attractive plant. But when you say junipers, I'm just like, oh God, no, not those.
Well, and Dobbs frosted has this like interesting, so we said 2 feet tall and 5 to 6 feet wide, but it's almost vase-like a wide V. When you draw a seagull, when you learn how to draw a seagull, where it's just this like expansive V up in the sky when you're, in drawing 101 when you're a kid, that's the shape that it has. So that enables a small rake to just go underneath it and pull the leaves out from under it. So no stabbing, no leaves, no stabbing, no deer, foolproof. Come on. You can't ask for anything more.
I could kill it. So another plant that I think is the best of the bunch, but maybe all of the genus, if not all of the species. Well, this plant doesn't even have a species. Okay, so who cares? Steve,
can we start? I'm confused. We're 2 seconds in, and I'm confused.
Yeah, me too. Okay. Ignore all that. So they're just going to edit it out. So click. Take two. My next plant is Blackbeard Penstemon. And
Hooray!
hooray! A lot of penstemons are great. Not all of them are suitable for all places, but there have been a lot of breeding in the burgundy-leaved ones, and they all seem to be really good plants in general. But I found that Blackbeard is one that colors up quickly and holds on to that color for a longer time. So like Husker Red was the first, but that starts out kind of green and then turns red, and at some point the colors get kind of muddy. But Blackbeard has this wonderful deep maroon foliage. It starts out in the spring that way and holds on to it for most, if not all, of the season. And so it's always a good looking plant. And it's about 2 to 3 feet tall and about 2 feet wide, but it's very narrow and upright stems, with the foliage coming off of these narrow stems. So it's great for towering above mounding things. I have it amidst a little sea of pennisetum, fountain grass, which takes its time getting going in the year. So while the pennisetum's just kind of sitting there looking like a yellow crew cut, after cut it back in spring, the penstemon's up and doing its thing and saying, don't look at the yellow crew cut, look at my burgundy foliage. And then about early summer, when the penstemon is a nice little green fountain of foliage, rising above it is this burgundy foliage, and then it puts out its flowers, which are like a lilac, pinky purple type thing, and they're tube shaped, which is wonderful for bumblebees. Bumblebees like to crawl in there. Other pollinators like to crawl in there. Supposedly hummingbirds, like tube, but I've never seen a hummingbird on it. But and so the inside of that flower is white. So you have like this two-tone lavender, lilac, pinky, white thing on these really dark stems and above really dark foliage. Zones 3 to 8, so it grows almost anywhere. And it wants full sun to partial shade, drought tolerant when established, deer resistant, pest resistant. Honestly, it looks good with everything because it has that burgundy presence to it. Like, I guess I could, if I worked hard, I could find something where it didn't look good with. But to me, I'm struggling to find things with that upright exclamation point without being like a giant focal point, thing. Like just something to stand up from my lower guys to kind of like bring the eye up to the next level. And I'm going with the penstemons, and to me, Blackbeard is the best. I've got it planted everywhere. I've also have Penstemon calicosus planted around, which is the eastern native species, as reseeded to the bejesus in a good way. But that's just pure green leaves with a pure white flower. Blackbeard has much more personality to it, so that's another plant that I just keep thinking like, well, Blackbeard Penstemon would look good here. Blackbeard Penstemon would look good here. Blackbeard Penstemon would do just fine here. And to me, that's a workhorse plant where you can just, put it in and rely on it to grow and look good.
I'm shocked. I don't have a single penstemon, I don't think, in my garden. I might have at one point in time, but I don't think I do. Is it, I'm wondering, just because I have very, lean, well-drained soil, if maybe, there are variety. It almost seems like there's a variety of penstemon for every situation, though, because there's a rock garden type penstemons.
Yeah, they're most of the species are Western, Western North America. So they may survive out here in the East, but they do not like our winter moisture.
Yeah.
We get things like Husker Red. That's Penstemon digitalis. That's one. So it's Western or prairie plants, and so things with the digitalis blood in them seem to do just fine coming out here. And Penstemon, like I said, Penstemon calicosus is the eastern version of it. Great plant, there are just showier versions of it that are coming from the prairie states.
Yeah.
And so like I don't know who the parents of Blackbeard are. Like it doesn't have a species, so but it's probably some like I said, Barbados, blood in it or whatever. But it does just fine out here. So there are plenty of options for the East. Most of the species are for the West, and they're wonderful. They are breeding a lot of big flowered penstemons now. So it's
Yeah.
like if you see those penstemons with the really big flowers, I found them to be very short lived.
Yeah, they almost look gentian like. They really
Yeah, yeah.
they're so big. It's like, what? That's not a penstemon.
It's
Yeah.
it's kind of like yeah, I don't know if anybody has grown them for more than 2 years, but
Hmm.
it's kind of like I don't know. Hey, wow! Look at my big flowers. You need to buy me, and you're like, oh yes, I do. And so you buy it, and then it never bothers coming back because you've
Yeah.
already paid
Yeah,
for
yeah,
it, so who cares?
yeah.
But yeah, so like
That
I don't get suckered into the big flowered penstemons anymore. I look
mm,
for the pretty foliage, and the flowers are born in such profusion that you're not sacrificing any floral show by not getting the giant flowers. They're just not in your
yeah.
face, which I don't go for anyway. So
Very interesting. All right, I'm going to move us out of the sun to part shade and into the full shade with my next plant, which is not any kind of novelty at all. It's not new at all. It's variegated Solomon seal. So polygonatum, odoratum, variety, pluriflorum, variegatum. Got all that? Variegated Solomon seal. Everybody knows this plant. Zones 3 to 9. What were you going to say, Steve? I'm
well, or
sorry.
some variation on that. Like that's a
Yes.
plant that has like 5 different Latin names, and like I don't know
Yes.
which one is the right one.
Yes.
But
I
we
threw
all
them
we all,
all into one name.
there you go. But we all know the plant that we're talking about. This is
Yes. Yes.
usually it's there a plant that has 5 common names,
Yes.
um, and one Latin name. If you just we all know we're talking about blah blah blah, and you use the Latin name. But in this one, if you use the common name, everyone knows what you're talking about. Variegated Solomon
Yes.
seal.
And the
Yeah,
Latin name is all over the
yeah,
place.
yeah.
Everybody knows this plant, apparently, except for my husband, because I have this, and it was one of the first plants that I planted when I moved to my house 10 years in July in my very small shade garden, which is right off of our porch. So it's not all that far away. Like the man grills at the grill right there. And the other day he goes, oh, you put in this new plant over here. It's like cool. It's got a like green leaf and it's got some like painted white stripes on it. That one's nice. I like that one. Where'd you get that one? I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? That thing's been there for 10 years and this is the first time you're noticing it. But maybe
Well,
that's
wait. Now, did his comment come quickly before him asking for a favor?
no. It was random and unprovoked. And I really try hard not to be like, hey, look at the new plant I put out there. So no, it was very, I just, yeah, it's kind of the same. Why am I surprised? I cut my hair. He notices 3 months later. It's one of those deals, but it has been a steady workhorse in my shade spot. I won't even call it a shade garden because it's so small. For so many years, it's my backdrop plant. It has beautiful arching stems that are of a reddish color. They have all these new cultivars now that they're like, this one has much redder stems. Well, guess what? Just the standard variegated Solomon seal has really red stems. It's beautiful. It has these lemon shaped green leaves that look like someone with very, very precision painting skills came through and just painted these slash marks of white around the outside. I mean, it really does look like someone came through with the teeny tiniest paintbrush and decorated each leaf with white. In the spring, those arching stems, which get to be about 24 inches tall, have these dangling little white bells underneath. Supposedly fragrant. I don't know. I mean, it's not one of those ones that, unless you shove your face underneath into this plant that you really smell, in my opinion. So I guess it's fragrant. I don't know. It's not why I grow it for that. And it's just, it's full shade to partial shade. It apparently wants moist, well-drained soil. I have dry soil, so it's drought tolerant once it's established. I did water it in, and I over the years the mass is kind of clumped out a little bit. I've cleaved some other pieces off for other folks. It's easily dividable in spring, and it's just a really solid plant. it's not the showiest thing in my little shade garden. It's not the most, ooh, wow, that's a focal point. But it's not that, but it's solid and it shows up every year, even though my husband thinks this is the first year that it's ever been in our garden.
So the deer don't eat it?
No.
Hmm.
No.
The deer loved mine, and that's why I don't grow it anymore.
Yeah, where my little shade area is, I think I've explained it before, that it's kind of like it's on the edge of a woodland, but there's some massive oak leaf hydrangeas that kind of obscure that area, and it's right up against the house. So I think, and with a hill behind it, so it's not a very easily accessible area. So maybe that's why. But yet they've nibbled on hostas that are on the edge there, but haven't touched that. So maybe, I'm offering them prime rib, and then here's, the overbaked potato on the left. So maybe they avoid the overbaked potato in favor of the prime rib.
Yeah, I mean, that plant is so easy to grow. It was it's like the second plant I ever grew, and did great with it until the deer would come every year and just, chow it down. It has a really thick rhizome to it. And I can recall, for some reason, I had to dig it up. I dug up the massive clump, and I kind of just chucked it over towards the woods and like threw some dirt around the clump, and said, oh, I just did you a disservice, you poor thing. And the next year it just popped right up again, still growing just fine. And the deer came and ate it again. But that's one of those plants that, wherever you put it in shade, it's going to look good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is.
Who doesn't want that?
I do.
So my last plant is a widely known workhorse. I don't think it gets as much love as it should, because it's not that showy. Even though it gets covered in flowers and covered in bees and pollinators, and it's Calamintha. Calamint is its common name. Lesser Calamint. Calamintha nepida, if we're getting specific, zones 4 to 9. And for those of you keeping score at home, its name did change to Clinopodium. So Calamint, which used to be Calamintha, is now Clinopodium.
Nope. I reject that.
It's a change that's slowly creeping in. A lot of places are using it, some places are not, but they're both the same plant. Don't get confused.
Why don't we just call it a salvia?
Eventually, I'm sure we will. Everything will be a salvia. So these plants top out at just over about a foot tall and wide. They have little tiny leaves. I don't even know what shape they are. They're just little tiny little. They're kind of bushy. They're so densely covered in little leaves, and then they get covered in little white to bluish lavender flowers in midsummer that last, I don't know, all summer, all the rest of the summer into fall, that are just absolutely adored by pollinators. Now, this plant was it was the PPA plant of the year a couple years ago. That's how great it is. I had a great year that year. I won the award. But it's so easy to grow, full sun to partial shade. I'm not sure what kind of soil it likes. I just kind of just pop it in anywhere. It seems to do just fine. It has minty smelling foliage, and it tends to look like a whitish, slightly bluish cloud in midsummer. And it's one of those things that you tuck into your gaps to kind of fill up space, and then it winds up looking good. At a certain point, you're like, oh, look at you, aren't you doing great? And then people give you the credit, which is great. It's oddly enough, it's native to the Mediterranean. So you would think it would like it hot, but it doesn't do well, apparently, in the American South. So what I'm thinking of is it doesn't like humidity. Because if it can take, the Mediterranean, heat, that's hot and dry. The American South is hot and moist. So that's what I'm thinking it is. But technically, zones 4 to 9, but like south of zone 7, in the American Southeast, I would question it. And it's also interesting that it's a pollinator magnet, but it's not a native plant, which is interesting. So Calamintha nepida, or Clinopodium nepida, depending on how current and cool you want to be. Lesser Calamint. why do I not grow more of this? There are tons of cultivars of it. I have like Montrose White and some blue cultivar, and they're all great. They're all great, and they're all performers, and they all like I tuck them in everywhere. Put 3 or 4 of them in. They form like a nice little bulk, and and like I said, start flowering in midsummer. It makes you feel good.
So nice along a path. Like whenever I think of Calamintha, I feel like I see a pathway. I see it billowing along a pathway, covered in all sorts of pollinators and just completely alive with activity.
It's one of those plants that I've been aware of for a long time, and people would rave about it. I'm like, what's so great about this plant? And then I think I wound up taking some home from the fine gardening plant sale, and grew it. And I said, like, oh, this is why everybody grows it. It's just this tough little guy that gets covered in flowers, teeny tiny little flowers, and that's why you kind of have to plant it close to the front. Because if you plant towards the back, you're gonna miss the blooms. And it's just loaded with pollinators. Great tough plant. Like I said, looks good with anybody. Starts flowering at a time when everything else is starting to look kind of straggly, and I feel like I can pop that in anywhere and it's going to do just great.
Yeah, I feel like that's another one. I'm adding that to the list. I don't grow it. I think I should. I think I have a good spot for it. It seems like it would do really, really well in my soil conditions. So I'm adding it to the list.
Well, that's kind of the point of the whole show is for people to,
Well, not for me. Not for me.
Oh, so my powers of persuasion are so strong that I've even influenced you. So
that I even agreed with you. I mean, I think just must be. I'm overtired. I didn't sleep well last night.
You're just doing it to be nice.
Yeah.
You're gonna ask me you're gonna ask me for a favor in a minute.
I want some Carmina Geranium. I already asked for it at the top of the show.
Just spray paint your Biocovo pink and you'll be okay.
All right, so I felt like I couldn't go, or we couldn't go, an entire episode whose title is Favorite Workhorses without mentioning Panicle Hydrangeas. It was actually the first plant that I put on the list and I started writing about when we were getting ready for this episode, because how I started off was thinking, what plant, if it was missing from my garden tomorrow, would be tragic. It would really, really be a detriment to my garden. My garden wouldn't be nearly as nice if it disappeared tomorrow. And for me, that would be Panicle Hydrangea. I have talked at length about many different varieties that I have in my garden. I primarily have dwarf varieties like Bobo, Little Quickfire, but I also have some big ones as well, like Limelight Hydrangea, which has margarita green flowers to it that eventually fade to white. These are cotton candy like flowers that come a little bit later in the season, generally midsummer, and here in the Northeast at least. And they're reliable bloomers because they bloom off of new wood, so you don't have to worry about whether or not the frost is going to nip the buds. We've talked at length about all the things that make Panicle Hydrangea so much better than many other varieties or many other species of hydrangeas. They're drought tolerant. They thrive in lean soils. You can put them in partial shade. You can put them in full sun. I just think that they're great. Zones 3 to 9 too. So that's a pretty large zonal range for them. So obviously Hydrangea paniculata, Panicle Hydrangeas. I'm experimenting with a new one this year. And it's Limelight Prime Time. So my favorite of the Panicle Hydrangeas, even above Quickfire that has red stems, is Limelight. I think because it reminds me of margaritas, which is my favorite drink in the summer. But it's really, truly my favorite shrub that I think I have in the garden. It gets big. It's 8 by 8. It's 8 feet tall, 8 feet wide. It's a behemoth. So this Limelight Prime Time, the thing that allegedly makes it different is that it only gets about 6 feet tall and wide. It has stronger stems. So these flowers on normal Limelight, pretty large, football shaped or sized flowers. And a lot of times that ends up kind of giving you a splayed look. The flowers will, especially like with heavy with dew, they'll kind of, lie down a bit, which isn't great. So this primetime limelight has allegedly stronger stems, and tends to bloom a little bit earlier. So for those of you in zones 3, 4, where sometimes, the panicle hydrangeas don't come into bloom until late August, early September, this guy, Limelight Primetime, allegedly comes into bloom a little bit early. For me, that doesn't make such a difference, but I know for some folks out there, it really would. So yeah, I feel like the only knock against panicle hydrangeas that annoys me, because I have so many of them, is that the blooms are great through the winter because they hold on, they kind of turn a tawny brown, and they kind of hold on to the plant. And then you have, beautiful frost and snow that is on them. And then they're a pain in the neck to get rid of in the spring, because you have to sit there and you clip off every single one of those blossoms, because they don't fall off for the most part on their own. But that's the only thing I can think of that's a knock against them. They've gone crazy with panicle hydrangeas lately.
So one of the conditions that they can also survive that you didn't mention is that they can also be left in a black plastic pot on the north side of a house for, the entire year or two. And then when you think they're dead in spring and they magically leaf out, then you can plant them and they will do just fine. There is such a magic plant in the fine gardening test garden, because it was a freebie that came to my house. And I'd never planted it, and it started to leaf out, and I felt pity for it. And the only place there was room for it was at the fine gardening test garden, where I shoved it in and had one branch with one leaf, and now it's big and round and blooming and doing great.
Beautiful.
So what's your pruning regimen for them? Do you cut them all the way back? Do you cut them halfway back? What's your deal? What do you do?
So I did that experiment. I think it was last year. I have two little limes that were right next to one another. And one I cut back pretty severely, and one I just did a little shaping pruning. Here's the difference. When I cut the one all the way back, I had less flowers, but they were bigger flowers. The one that I only kind of, nipped and pruned a little bit just to shape it up, I had more flowers, but they were smaller.
So, what about flopping? Did one flop more than the other?
No, it really didn't. But again, that very scientific experiment was run on little limes. So that's one that only really gets to be 3 feet tall and wide anyway. So it's not a huge, ginormous one. I think to really get a sense of it, you would have to do it on a larger, full-size limelight, or maybe a full-size quick fire that's a little bit bigger. So I've tried both. You know what? This year it's going to be interesting, because on several of my panicle hydrangeas, I actually did renovation pruning on them. I took them down to nubs. I had giant canes that were probably in excess of an inch or more thick, and I whacked them all the way back. I'm scared now because they're coming back, but wow. It's that moment of panic when you do a renovation pruning of going, oh God, what did I do? And I know it's going to pan out in the end just to be a much better shape. And, it's going to be a much better shrub for it. But man, that's always, your heart skips a beat.
Yeah. I used to cut mine all the way back because I thought you were supposed to, but they would always be kind of floppy and gangly. And so this past year I did not. I cut it back to a strong framework. So I cut it back maybe by 1/3 to 2/3 or half. And they're looking great, because my mother has one in her yard, and it's huge, and it stands up straight and tall, and big flowers, loads of flowers, and she doesn't touch it.
Yeah.
She cuts off the dead flowers, or most of the dead flowers, in springtime, and that's all she does to it, and it looks great. So I took a much lighter hand to mine this year, and so far so good, but it's still early in the year.
Yeah, I would always want, when I did that experiment, that side by side, I prefer more flowers but just not as big. So, if it was an ordinary year, I think I came up with my answer of I'm just going to do, pruning for shape, removing the dead, and taking a lighter touch. But yeah, I'll check back in with that Reno pruning. Oh God, what did I do?
And now, because everything sounds better with a British accent, here's Peter with his thoughts on Workhorse Plans.
What does it mean to be a workhorse? It doesn't sound good, bringing to mind thankless toil and drudgery. But for something to be a workhorse option is most certainly a compliment. The term implies it's something we can rely on in almost any situation to do whatever the job might be. Because we know the workhorse will come through for us, it reduces the number of things we are unsure of, and thus decreases our anxiety and increases our confidence. Think of the go-to items in your life. That pair of jeans that looks cool with anything else you want to wear? Or maybe it's a pair of shoes. Steve has a grey hooded sweatshirt that he wears to almost every meeting, like it was a security blanket or something. And what about that thing you cook when you need something fast, filling and tasty? That's your workhorse recipe. Your workhorse plants should be cherished. Be not discouraged if the local mall, gas station or fast food emporium has also discovered just how reliable those plants are. Consider it a testament to just how tough they are and how artful you are in creating a design that uses many of the same plants as the Gas and Go, but so much more creatively.
Okay, so Steve, now that we've heard about other types of workhorses from Peter, what is your go-to workhorse meal?
Oh, that's easy. Take out pizza. Everybody loves it, and it can't be easier.
I like it. All right, let's see if our expert has anything to talk about as far as workhorse meals, or at least workhorse plants.
Hi, everyone. This is Joann Vieira, and I'm the Director of Horticulture for the Trustees of Reservations in Massachusetts. And I wanted to share with you today some of my favorite workhorses for the perennial garden. I'm starting with a native baby's breath, Euphorbia correlata, a plant that is really underused in gardens and a terrific filler plant that brings sort of a baby's breath, open, airy flower structure to the summer garden. These airy little flowers occur on 3-foot tall stems. It starts to bloom in June and blooms over the course of several weeks, really not winding down fully until September. It occurs naturally in sort of waste places, roadside edges, the edges of woodlands and rocky meadows. So that gives you a clue to the conditions that it prefers in your garden. Full sun and well-drained soil. If you give it a rich garden soil, it will be very happy there, but it will tend to be a much more relaxed plant. And that is the case in my own garden. So I like to combine it with supporting plants around it that will help hold it upright. It's a little difficult to stake because it has these very narrow stems and narrow leaves that are only about a ½ inch wide and about 2.5 inches long. And the leaves occur in whorls around the stem. So it's a little tough because it's so open and airy to stake this plant. So combine it with some other plants that will help support it, and it will create a really nice airy effect in and amongst other plants. It does go to seed a little bit in the garden, so it will, if you allow it to, give you some nice drifts and masses. And it really tends to soften other plants. I like to combine it with things that have a nice contrasting texture, so plants that have bold foliage or large flowers. In particular, in my garden, I have it combined with a large flowered peach-colored daylily. And it almost has that effect of a bouquet, with the baby's breath surrounding it. So a really nice combination. I will give you one word of caution about this plant. Like many euphorbias, it has a milky sap. So when the leaves and stems are broken, this milky sap is exuded from the cut surfaces. And that sap can be a skin irritant for most people. It's certainly also a problem if you get it in your eyes. So you want to be very careful with it when you're cutting it back or, clipping some flowers on it. That milky sap, however, gives it some protection from critters. So it's never eaten by rabbits or deer or woodchucks because it is toxic to them. So a nice protective device for this plant. It also is perfectly hardy to zone 5, so pretty easy to use in the garden. The second plant I wanted to talk to you about is also a full sun plant. It is one of my favorite cultivars of Nepeta or Catmint. The cultivar I like for edging and the front of the border is one called Persian blue. And very cleverly, Persian is spelled Purrrsian. So connecting that name to the Catmint common name. What I like about Persian blue is that it's a low grower, so it's 12 to 15 inches tall. It's quite compact, so it blooms over a long period like most other cultivars, but it doesn't flop open as readily as many of the others do. When this is done blooming, and it starts blooming in late May and it continues over a period of several weeks, when it's finished, I just take head shears and just shear this plant. I shape it a little bit and shear it nicely, and then it will come back and rebloom again later in the season. So when I'm shearing it, I'm really just taking the flower clusters off and going back just a little bit into the foliage mass to allow it to regenerate some flowers later. This plant is perfectly hardy to zone 4, so easy to use in colder climates. It protects itself from predators by having fragrant foliage. So the sort of blue-gray foliage when it's crushed, has what I find to be an attractive scent to it, but other critters don't care for either the scent or the taste. So it will be left alone in the garden and behaves quite well for you. Another plant for full sun, even later blooming than the first two, is an ornamental onion called Allium millennium. And this plant has become quite popular for really great reasons. First of all, it has a protective device like the others. So it has, like most onions, it has an odor to the foliage, which makes it resistant to damage from insects and other critters that might feed on other plants in the garden. That foliage is also quite attractive when the plant isn't in bloom. So the leaves are 6 to 12 inches tall. They're about a ½ inch wide, and they're quite flattened and a nice dark green and glossy. So attractive on its own right. And then later in the season, beginning in mid to late August, these flowering stems that are about 18 inches tall rise up over the foliage and are topped with a 2-inch globe of sort of a rosy purple flower cluster. So many, many little individual flowers in that globe on top of the stem. And blooms for quite a long period of time. Really, really attractive, easy to grow, wants full sun, a well-drained soil. The bulbs that form to create this plant actually create a nice little mass, so it's easy to divide in spring or fall and create drifts and masses in the front of your border. The last plant I wanted to tell you about is one for shade. This one is much larger than the allium or the catmint that we just spoke about. It is a plant called waxy bells. The Latin for this, or the botanic name for this, is Carengoshoma palmata, and it comes from Japan and Korea in zone 5, where it is quite hardy. In the garden, in the shade, it forms almost a shrub-like mass. The stems are not woody, so it's an herbaceous perennial. Stems die back to the ground in the fall, but each season the stems rise up to 3 to 4 feet tall and are covered throughout the growing season with leaves that look a lot like the leaves of a maple tree and are about 6 inches across or so a good-sized leaf. It tolerates fairly well-drained soils and will let you know when it's dried out too much. So the leaves will wilt down when it dries out, but it rebounds really quickly once you water it. So tolerant of very tough conditions and a good indicator plant for when the garden needs to be irrigated. Come late summer, it will start to have these rounded green buds on top of these stems. Each of those buds opens to a single drooping yellow flower with waxy petals. The flower itself is about maybe an inch long, a little bit longer than that perhaps. A nice clean yellow color, quite an interesting color for the fall. And it's not, most of the fall blooming plants that we think of are full sun plants. So this is really a great one for shady conditions. It is even a little bit hardier than the other plants that we've talked about, so good and hardy to zone 4 and quite easy to grow. So there you have it, 4 great workhorses for the garden, 3 for sun and 1 for the shade. I hope you found this information useful and will give some of these plants a try. Thanks so much for tuning in.
So yeah, Joann, Nepeta, smart lady.
I mean, I'm going to have to start running interference with these experts and just let them know, like, hey, here's Steve's list ahead of time. You can't mention any plants that he mentions because I don't want his head to get any bigger.
That's cheating.